Okay, and we're live. This is Deacon Joseph Sweden.
This is Bishop Enoch.
I feel I shouldn't be the one who said Christ is risen because
Christ is risen.
Truly is risen. So here we are at the Orthodox Apologetics channel. We've been basically preparing for this episode for a while. A lot of people have asked us, for more details on the Hildebrand thing. It's caught steam. People are starting to realize, wait, maybe this investiture controversy thing might have been a misnomer, because it wasn't like a bunch of people having a friendly argument. It was basically basically a Western civil war that led to the creation of what we know as the Papacy, or the Roman Catholic Church. So this is something we've been looking forward to for a long time. But we've been busy. It's been crazy with Lent and with a bunch of other things. So we're finally getting to it. We're going to detail it. We're not just going to detail it. We're going to detail it with a handy chart. We're going to go through sources. We're going to go through the items. And we're going to explain how it is basically how shall I put this? It's irrefutable that what was created by Hildebrand and his followers was not a unique religion from before. So indisputable that we can basically show historical proofs and texts of people at the time who understood it was a war. They understood it was a struggle for control over what would, either the Roman Church or what would become the Roman Catholic Church. And so it's a serious broadcast. I see that Alexander and Anthony in the chat. A lot of you, people and other people too as well have been asking for the data, and we've provided some of it, I think. But we're going to try to get as detailed as possible. We may even pull up a chart. So this is where it's going to get interesting. Actually, we're probably going to have to pull up the chart real soon because I'm going to be the one writing on it. So let me do that real quick. And we're gonna go live with it, and we're gonna explain the whole thing. So let's put that on there. And I guess we'll get started. Okay, now, Lydia, the first thing you mentioned was when we were talking about this just now, and I want to also bring up the text that you had, the letter of Benzo. But you had mentioned earlier, I've got the list of popes here, and so I'm looking here from this is looking at the wonderful Wikipedia page. There was Benedict X, who was April 1058 to January 1059, and that was I guess that would be the one that succeeded. Let me see here. He was elected in opposition to Pope Nicholas II in 1059.
Well, actually, we need to go back to Benedict IX. Actually,
okay. Now Benedict IX, and let's write him on the chart because he's important. Wasn't he deposed like 3 times? Like they replaced him, then they put him back.
Resigned several times. Yes.
Yep.
He was about 20 years old. He was 20 years old when they made him pope.
Oh wow. Okay. And that would have started in 1032. So this is something to keep in mind. First term, 1032. And immediately from here, how long did he last his first term? He lasted...
Well, the important part about this... Okay, I'm sorry, is...
No, please, go ahead.
Well, the important part is they were simply from the early... from about the 1030s, you're looking at a period of just basic chaos in Rome. About who was supposed to be the validly elected Bishop of Rome. Right. So, Theophilus of Tusculum becomes Benedict IX. He's 20 years old. I don't believe there was, in fact, an imperial mandate to certify his election. He was the nephew of John the 19th, who was the immediate successor. The election was obtained through bribery, and he lived extremely dissolute lifestyle. He was driven out of Rome, and Sylvester III was made his successor. So Correct. They basically ran him out of town, and they're like, well, we don't recognize him as Pope anymore, so we're electing this other guy. All right? So
Okay.
the question then is that already from what the traditional Roman Catholic perspective, if there's bribery in a papal election, there's no certification there, then that's not even about, they oftentimes, the conclavist, others oftentimes talk about how do you have a valid election. Well, how do you have a valid papal election in the 1030s if the family that gets their son elected, they bribe all the people doing it, and then he's driven out of Rome. I don't know if you want to. You have to continue talking. I can't talk for extended periods of time because I had recently had surgery. But continue, Father.
Yeah. Okay. So then, basically, um, we get to Sylvester the Third, and Sylvester the Third, the validity of his election's question. He's considered an anti-pope. He's deposed at the Council of Sutri, and that was called by the Emperor Henry the Third, and it was opened on 1046 in the hill town of Sutri. And that basically
Well,
removed Sylvester.
remember, just jump in there. Remember when Sutri happened, there were already 2 or 3 claimants at
Right.
Sutri. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, the reason why is because of the fact that obviously Pope Benedict himself did not. I don't think he recognized his own deposition. So basically, these were 2 rival factions of the Roman nobility, the Counts of Tusculum versus the Crescenzi, basically. So at this point, and then Gregory the Sixth was claimed to have purchased the title from Benedict the Ninth 2 years previously. So now you have 3 Simoniac popes, and the Council of Sutri basically was asked by Henry III to kind of make order out of this. And so you already have, but this is, keep in mind, this is still before the schism. We're talking about 9 years before the schism. There were 3 rival popes who all basically, if I remember correctly, all of them were deposed. If I remember, it's according to the wiki, basically Gregory resigned. He had judged himself to be removed because of the enormous error, which by simoniacal impurity has crept into and vitiated my election. So he actually does admit to this. And then they did the exact same thing. I mean, obviously, he says it in such a way that makes me wonder if he kind of was told what to say by the emperor. But the point is, all of them basically have to do the exact same thing. So, basically...
So Benzo speaks about this. Now, there's a book you can find called "The Papal Reform of the 11th Century: The Lives of Pope Leo IX and Pope Gregory the Seventh," and translated. Yes, it's translated and annotated by I.S. Robinson. And one of the important things about it is in the Appendix 1, it contains the translation of Book 7 of Benzo of Alba's book to Henry, to the Emperor Henry III, or Henry IV. Benzo died around like 1089. He had always kind of been an opponent to Hildebrand. He had been the Bishop of Alba, but he was driven out of his see by a group called the Patarines, who were kind of a Gnostic group that was on the periphery, or to be honest, within the Hildebrandians, and then later after the Hildebrandians took power, they were later condemned as heretics because they were no longer useful.
Well, yeah, because they were actually an ally to the Hildebrandians early on, weren't they?
Yes. In fact, there was a famous Milanese deacon who was one of their leaders, and he was well known for driving out and married clergy, and he's considered a martyr in the Roman Catholic Church today because he was set upon by angry family members who were angry at having their houses burned down by him, and he was had some sort of fight with him, and he got hit in the back of the head and he died. I can't remember.
Starting a tradition which led to even people like Joseph Atkinsevich during the Unia destroying people's lives and then killed by angry mobs, and then Rome recognized them as martyrs.
Yes. Okay, so Benzo of Alba, if you look in the translation of the letter, the translation of one of the books, the whole book hasn't yet been translated yet. He says that. Well, actually, he gives an overview first off of how elections to the papacy was supposed to be done. Okay.
What page is that on so that I can just read it? Because I have that on the screen right now.
Beginning on page 366, section 2. Now he talks about
great.
now if he mentions someone called Fraulein Prendelis, which is another name for Hildebrand.
Oh, follow Prendel.
Okay,
Right. That was the yeah. In the footnote of this, as you'll notice, Benzo has no love of Hildebrand. So that follow Prendelis is basically one of Benzo's, as it says, contemptuous versions of the name Hildebrand. The others being Aldeprandus and most often Prendelis. And this version uses the medieval Latin adjective "fallus" or "foolish" to say, "fallus Prendelis." But in any case, the point is, so it says, since we wish now to say something about the most impious heresy of Fallum Prendelis, it is necessary to begin briefly with earlier events. When Emperor Constantine was converted to the observance of the Christian religion by divine revelation, by the worthy preaching of Saint Sylvester, he strengthened the Catholic faith in many and various ways. After he drew nigh to the high office in Rome and almost all the city with him to the apostolic faith, he established by edict that all should conform to one and the same profession of faith. For this reason, he left his patrician in Rome to defend the Commonwealth, and he wished the Apocrysarius, whom he received from the hands of the Pope to be in Constantinople, to retain ecclesiastical discipline.
Let me stop there for a moment. The patrician of the emperor left in Rome was the personal representative of the emperor. This is viceroy. Okay? All right, so he when the emperor is not in, when Constantine or the other emperors were not in Rome, they had a patricius or a patrician who was their personal representative in the city. Okay, continue.
Right.
And the Apocrysarius was the representative of the Bishop of Rome. Anyway, okay.
Right. So it says, thus the Apocrysarius would counter anyone presuming to talk nonsense against the faith, and the patrician would oppose anyone wishing to inflict an injury on the Roman Church. And since the election of the Pope was carried out in subterranean places for fear of the pagans, he commanded that henceforth it should be celebrated solemnly in an assembly of the people in this manner. Okay. If the emperor was in a place where a Roman emperor...
Let me stop you for a second. Notice what Benzo is describing is that the actual details of the election of the papacy, or really the bishopric, after the persecution, were worked out between St. Sylvester and the Emperor Constantine. Okay, St. Constantine. All right. So this is a symphonia between the Bishop of Rome and the Emperor. All right. They both respect. And they have important positions to have in the church because they're both part of the same church. There's not supposed to be a contradiction between the hierarchy, the priesthood, and the imperial authorities, since they're both supposed to be in the church. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Then basically, let me go back to the text, and it says,
and since
if the emperor was in a place... Oh, and since the election of the Pope was carried out in subterranean places for fear of the pagans, he commanded that henceforward it should be celebrated solemnly in an assembly of the people in this manner. If the emperor was in a place where a Roman embassy could reach him in 1 or 2 months, the election would be delayed while his clemency was asked by the envoy whether it be pleased to present in person. To be present in person. If, however, the emperor was in a distant part of the world, on this side or the other side of the sea, the patrician should sit in state in place of the emperor, and the election should be performed by the clergy, the senate, and people according to God's will. Finally, no one was to presume to receive consecration until he obtained the imperial consent, either in person or by his letter. We know that no one ever violated this command except for Pelagius, who dared not send his embassy to the emperor because of the very frequent raids of the Lombards around Rome.
Wait, for a second,
I'm going to stop here.
That Pelagius is Pelagius the First, who was elected. Pelagius the Second, I believe, who was elected in the 550s, and he was the first bishop not to have the mandate. But the reason being, as he said, was because the city was surrounded at that time by the Lombards, and the Emperor St. Justinian's armies had not yet had time to liberate the city. So, but remember, the Emperor
played into.
But the Emperor Justinian did, in fact, give his mandate post facto after the consecration had been done. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Continue.
I was going to say, but this was part of the debates, early debates that Pope St. Martin had with the emperor because of they were trying to withdraw the imperial mandate from him for a while. If I remember correctly.
I'm sorry, you cut out there for a second. Can you repeat that, Father Joseph?
No, I was saying that what I was saying was that this also plays into the life of Pope St. Martin because of the fact that there was a period where they attempted to withhold the imperial mandate from him.
Yes.
The point we're trying to make here is that as Bishop Enoch mentioned, the Symphonia, and in the West they referred to this often as the two swords theory, was not a theory. It was almost to the level of dogmatic. It was well understood that the church and the state worked together. The church and the Christian state worked together and confirmed each other.
Now,
So this is something that was.
Let me stop you there for 1 second. I don't disagree with you, but we have,
Yeah.
but even how you phrase it, I often phrase it, we have to be very careful, because they would not have said church and state.
Right.
Because they would have said the priesthood and the civil authority, because the emperor is part of the church, just as much as the bishops. The bishops have their position. The emperor and the senate and the people have their position. So even when we speak about church and state, that's oftentimes something we have to get over. That's a much later post-schism, Roman Catholic, really Ultramontane version of papism, because even in France in the 13th century, they were trying to dispute that. They ultimately lost that, the whole debate with the Gallicans and such. But there was no dispute between the fact that the emperor was part of the church and the bishops were part of the church. So to say it was the church cooperating with the Orthodox state wouldn't make sense to them. It's like, well, the Orthodox state is part of the church. The church is not
Right.
just the patriarch with the bishops. So even even in the fact of us trying to normally speak of it, we're having this issue here. Anyway, go ahead.
Right, and that I think comes from just being an American.
Yes,
you tend to say church and state.
Yes.
But the concept was much higher in the church. Is that because the state represents people,
because it's a whole Christian society, and the whole society.
Right.
And this is why, in fact, in ancient Orthodox Christian law, it was so strange to have to deal with Jews or heretics and people outside the church, because technically they're not just outside the church, the quote unquote the church. If they're outside the church, they're not really part of the society, because society is supposed to be Orthodox too. And this is why it was always a vexing question about, well, you're not part of us, you're an alien form to us. So that's how. So they thought of it all as one continuum. If you understand what I mean.
Oh yeah, I absolutely understand, and this is part of this plays out actually. We see this in the 19th century with how the Russian Empire had to deal with groups like the Jews and certain other groups in their area, because they saw them as potential seditionists.
Yes. But that actually was quite true. And that was true, in fact, in Constantinople in the 500s, because there were cases in which Manichaean senators would work with the Persian Zoroastrians to find some way to betray the emperor or to overthrow the Orthodox faith. That was
it's all you can see it in Spain. Yeah.
Yes.
In Hispania as well, you see that in the case of the fall of King Wamba, and eventually the Jews assisting the Saracens in taking the Visigothic kingdom.
Yes.
So that there's a lot of
Symphonia,
this sort of interplay.
But what we realize is, as soon as freedom comes, the Edict of Milan comes, the doctrine of Symphonia is not an invented doctrine. It's just how everything should be. If the king is Orthodox, then we work with the king. That's just how it's understood. So we can have, for example, the letter of Pope Saint Gelasius. There could be other writings in the Byzantine period as well that talk about Symphonia, but this was not something, if you know what I mean, they were inventing whole cloth, because this would go back in their understanding to the time of the King David. All right, King David wasn't trying to fight the high priest; they were cooperating together. In fact. So anyway,
they were both part of they comprised the Christian kingdom.
In that case, the Old Testament kingdom. In that case, the Old Testament church. But then there's the New Testament, and the whole thing still continues. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So if you want to continue,
we continue on, and it says the emperor.
Yeah.
The emperor, learning the true facts of the case from the patrician, did not take it amiss, because it was not done with evil intent. We believe, moreover, that it is not unknown to the bishops and wise clergy how the blessed Gregory was enthroned through the efforts of the patrician Germanus, according to the will and command of the Emperor Maurice. Whoever wishes to learn how long this lasted might deign to read through the Book of the Popes. There he will find how secure was the imperial judgment against those who dared to break the inviolable laws of the sacred order. For in the time of the Greeks or the Franks or the Germans who gained possession of the citadel of the Roman Empire, the perpetrator of this sacrilege never escaped punishment. Finally, Otto III, whose great deeds are proclaimed throughout the world, punish the criminal presumption of a certain false pope by mutilating his ears, tongue, nose, and gouging out his eyes. O man of men, O emperor of emperors, whose nobility of spirit you will be remembered forever and ever. If he was Otto III and you, Emperor Henry, are Henry III, then O you 2/3, be in one same fellowship of law.
Well, let me stop
And
you.
so that is
now the reference they're talking about is that there was a John Philogathos, who was, I think, Archbishop of Piacenza, or maybe someplace in actually Calabria, and he had himself made pope. It was done without the imperial mandate, and he was later obviously tortured and deposed. And in fact, far from this being some sort of Artonian Saxon intervention, there was a Saint Nilus of Calabria, who was one of the famous Italo-Greek saints, his disciples later founded some houses on Mount Athos, commends the Emperor Otto III for punishing John Philogathos for daring to assume the title of Bishop of Rome without the Emperor's permission. Now, he doesn't commend him. He does. Now, John Philogathos was actually the godfather of the Emperor's to one of his children. And so Saint Nilus actually says, well, you shouldn't have, pulled his tongue out or something like that. But he doesn't oppose the fact that he got rid of him. All right. So anyway, I'm just bringing that up there. Okay.
Well, no, that's good. I'm actually adding that to the chart. I'm kind of moving things down. So if we're following this, and I can add that, I can read from the text while working on this handy chart. And give me just a moment to do that, because I just added, I added John the 16th, the claimant, the anti-pope, and was false claimant. The emperor removes him. So this is 998. This is literally 2 years before the 11th century. So that's the kind of crazy that we're dealing with right now that Benzo is talking about to the emperor.
Yes, and Benzo hasn't even. There's a lot of other crazy stuff that happened in the 10th century. For example, Octavian, or John the 12th, who was deposed in 963 by Otto III, I believe, when Otto the Great, when a synod came to Rome made up of mostly Italian bishops and about 15 or so Lombard bishops, and then some 2 or 3 German bishops, in which they deposed John the 12th, and they elected in his stead Leo VIII and such. I think we may have spoken about that before, but that's, if you look at the history of the papacy during this period, it was just simply complete corruption. In fact, it got so bad that the Archbishop of Orleans famously said that we can't even pay attention to whatever these guys are saying. And he points out John the 12th in particular. So anyway, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I was just I'm like playing with the chart here, trying to make it nice and clean. But so yeah, we're going through this
because this is important background.
And we'll continue on with
the reason I bring this up is it's important background to read through this text. It's not very long text, like 7 pages or so, to understand what the opponents of the Ultramontanes and the so-called Hildebrandian reformers believed about the ecclesiology, how the bishopric of Rome operated, how the wider the synods of bishops related to him and to the emperor. Because if it's better to speak about it in this sense than just to start because if we start in 1062 or even in 1054, we're missing what happened in the decades prior. All right. So
what I'm going to do is I'm going to at this point I'm going to begin moving stuff because I do want to make that clear. So we're going to be, whenever we have to talk about background, we can do it with. All right. Maybe I should just make that a little thicker. Okay, so the point is, right now we're here. So we're in that area where basically he's talking about in the past. So he's talking about just a few years hence. We're not even in the mess we're in, which is because Benzo is writing about Hildebrand. So this is my point. He's giving the background to the emperor, and so we'll continue.
Father Joseph, if you could continue reading. If it comes to a point where the Google preview doesn't have the text, I actually have the rest of the text, and I can read a little bit. As long as I have a break every now and again. Okay, go ahead.
So far, it looks good. So I'll continue. So it's Benzo continues to the emperor, but let us come to the matter at hand. When our Lord Emperor Henry II wished to come to Rome to receive his consecration, he heard that. Now it says Henry III, King of the Germans. He heard that 3 devils.
That's Henry II, isn't it?
Huh?
Is it Henry?
It is Henry II, but they corrected it to Henry III on the bottom.
Oh, okay, I see. Okay.
And the
All right.
So when Henry II wished to come to Rome to receive his consecration, he heard that 3 devils had usurped the throne of the Apostolic See.
Now
this
that
is where we get to the whole thing. Yeah, this is where we get to the Council of Sutri. So he commanded them to meet him in Sutri, but only 2 of them came there. A synod was held there, over which the king presided together with the bishops, and in which both men were condemned by a just judgment, while the third man who fled was struck down by a thunderbolt of anathema. They came to Rome. On the next day, a council was assembled in the church of the Prince of the Apostles, in which King Henry presided in the midst of the bishops. The whole Roman nobility was present in all its ranks, surrounded by dukes and princes holding various offices, among whom also was Margrave Boniface. After they assembled, they all became still and waited eagerly in silence. Then the king said, Roman lords, hitherto you have been allowed to make a wise or foolish decision, choosing whomever you wished in the way you pleased. Behold, let your election be made in the customary manner. Take from whom you will this whole assembly. With a single spirit and with the same purpose, they replied, when the royal majesty is present, the election is no longer in our jurisdiction or according to our will. And if you happen to be absent on a number of occasions, nevertheless you always participate in the election of a pope through the office of the patrician, who is your deputy. For the patrician is not the patrician of the pope, but rather the patrician of the emperor.
Father Joseph, I'm going to stop you. You're cutting in and out for some reason.
Okay. I'm not sure how, but I can try to adjust my microphone.
Yes. No, that's worse.
That's worse?
Yes. I can hear all kinds of stuff. I can hear all kinds of background noise.
Hello? Okay, let me try this again.
Just go back to normal.
All right. Okay, here I am. All right.
Yeah, okay.
Can you hear me now? Okay. For the patrician is not the patrician of the pope, but rather the patrician of the emperor, to attend to the affairs of the commonwealth. We therefore confess that we have gone astray, and less than wise, we have enthroned fools and ignorant men. It belongs to your imperial power to improve the commonwealth with laws, adorn it with morals, and control this holy apostolic church with your defending arm, so that it suffers no harm. End quote. Then they took the council with the approval of the Holy Synod and with the commendation of the senators and other Roman citizens and the multitudes of the nobles and peoples gathered there. It was decreed that King Henry, together with all those succeeding him in the imperial monarchy, should become the patrician, just as we have read to have happened in the case of Charles. Immediately a shout was raised to heaven, in which there were intermingled the voices of clerks and laymen praising God. The king was then clad in a bright green mantle, invested with the patrician's ring, and crowned with the golden circlet of that same office. Then he was requested by all the ranks of the people on bended knee to elect according to God's will, and after careful investigation, such pontiffs whose teachings would purge the pestilential sickness of the church and recall the feeble world to salvation. At the king's command, they all rose and sang the Holy Litany, shedding tears as they did so. Then the king took the Bishop of Bamberg with his powerful right hand and caused him to sit in the apostolic seat. He was saluted by them all according to this custom, and the synod was brought to an end. On the day of the Lord's Nativity, the Pope was consecrated, and King Henry was anointed by his hands with the oil of the Holy Spirit and raised to the empire. The Pope was called Clement, and deservedly so, for he was good and kind, pleasing to God and men. He was succeeded by the Bishop of Brixen, rich in knowledge of literature. That would be Pope Clement II in 1046.
Yes. The Bishop of Brixen would be Damasus II, I believe, too.
Right. Mm-hmm. And Brixen will play out as we continue on here. So let's take a look here as we continue. So now...
now let me stop you. Let me stop here for a second, just to make a comment. While we have to update the... We're going to have to update now the list of the papacy claims. All right.
Right. Okay.
And you might, according to Hildebrand, Benzo, you might want to move Benedict IX, Sylvester III, and also include Gregory the Sixth, and kind of move them to claimants, because according to Benzo, there are 3 devils, and they didn't even.
Okay. Give me one.
Now.
Who was the other one?
There's Gregory the Sixth also.
Okay, Gregory the Sixth. Give me a moment. Hold on.
But I would like to make a few comments here. When it says that the king the emperor was then clad in a bright green mantle, invested with the patrician's ring, and crowned with a golden circlet of that same office, what was the green mantle? The green mantle was actually a long flowing green robe. It was actually a chasuble. Later, in the much later period, beginning of the 16th and 17th century, because the papacy objected, the then post-schism papacy objected to the emperors wearing the cassola, or the chasuble, in a conical form, they began to cut. For example, there's actually remains the chasuble of Saint King Henry of Hungary, who reposed in 1030 or so, in which, if you look at it now, it looks like it's a cope, but it was physically deformed in the 16th or 17th century at the request of papist authorities, because they did not like the idea of such an elevated concept that even the emperor or consecrated king could wear a cassola, the chasuble.
Yeah, but that's actually Roman in origin. For those who know, the Roman emperor actually did use.
For example, it's like the emperor in Constantinople wore sackos. Bishops also were granted the right to wear sackos. It would be like suddenly, imagine that the patriarch Saint Philotheos Kokinos in the 1300s or something said, "Oh well, no, the emperor can't wear a sackos anymore because us bishops wear sackos." All right, and because they wanted to do away with the concept of the emperor having kind of a semi-sacerdotal role in the church to fulfill. And this is also part of.
Did he do that?
No, he didn't do that. I'm just saying it would be as ridiculous as that. I mean, but he didn't do that. I'm just saying St. Philotheos did not do that. I'm just saying that the later attempts in the post-schism period to degrade this Christian monarchy was also coincided with the elevation of the Vatican. And this, reached the high point like under Innocent III and other figures like that,
Right.
And of course, the Papal States became a big issue too. But.
Okay, so let me go back to the text here. He was succeeded by the Bishop of Brixen, rich in the knowledge of literature, but he lived in the city only 23 days. After him, the Lord Leo was appointed by the same emperor, and it seems superfluous to say anything about him since he has his altar in the Church of St. Peter. Mm-hmm. Okay, I actually don't have the next page.
Okay, so I'll read the next.
Wait, or do I? No.
I'll read the next page. It says, when the Lord Leo, this is Leo IX, slept. Now, Leo IX, it says, when he slept to sleep at peace. Okay, now let's stop here for a second. Leo IX is an interesting figure. He was, of course, the Pope of Rome during the time of the Great Schism. I don't know what to think of him, and I say that because I'm not sure if there's actually, when Patriarch Michael Corellarius issued the anathema, he did not personally anathematize Leo IX. And he did not do that because he did not believe Leo IX had actually signed the excommunication anathema that Humbert brought. All right. In fact, Michael Corellarius' argument was that Leo IX was basically being lied to by everybody around him and used, and by figures like Humbert. Now, if there is an anathema somewhere in the books against Leo IX, then I retract that. But my understanding is that there was never a personal anathema issued against him. Now, he has a lot of fault to show for allowing these people to run everything around him. But Benzo kind of graces over him without saying a lot. All right. So Benzo says, when the Lord Leo slept the sleep of peace, there came to the emperor's court 3 monks, ostensibly from Rome, although they were not from Rome. For the first of them was from Tuscany, another from Burgundy, a third from Apulia, and one was called Hildebrandus. All right, it's interesting. Who's Hildebrandus? That's another word for Hildebrand. Okay. The second Humbert, well, who's Humbert? Was the so-called Bishop of Silva Candida. That's the other guy involved in racism. Okay, so these guys who have been hanging around Leo IX, basically running the show around him, lying to him, now they're showing up. Because remember, Leo IX was elected with the imperial mandate, with the confirmation of the emperor, the patrician, the senate, the people, and the other bishops. All right? So Leo IX was technically elected according to this model.
Right.
Well, now what's happening? Well, some people are beginning to, people like Humbert and Hildebrand are like, well, who's going to be the Pope next? Okay, so these men arrive.
Now it's worth noting, I should note this, because one thing to remember is that Leo IX died in April of 1054.
Yes.
Which means that he was already old. He was already on his deathbed. And so whatever they were doing at this point, is less under his control than people would like to admit.
Yeah, and first off, I'm inclined to agree with Patriarch Michael Carrier that he didn't sign anything. Or if he did sign anything, he was probably so out of it he had no idea what was happening. So, okay. The second Humbert, the third Boniface, that was the Cardinal Bishop of Albano, and they pretended that they were performing a legation for the election of the future pastor, this pastor of Rome. Father Herman, Archbishop of Cologne, said to them, quote, "Since you are monks, this affair does not concern you. You will run away from St. Benedict and wish to be bound by no rule. If it please my lord the emperor, we should wait for the Romans. Meanwhile, let him order you to be kept under guard," end quote. So Archbishop Herman of Cologne is saying that, look, some of you are monks and you should be in a monastery. Why are you running about involved in electioneering politics about who's going to be Bishop of Rome?
But yeah, doesn't I thought Bruno uses the term Cerebites, which is
later he does. In fact, yes, he later calls it. He says this is not your now. Obviously, nowadays in the church, monks are elected, but even the election of monks oftentimes they were not campaigning to get themselves elected or engaging in electioneering. Okay.
Well, I think you might want to explain a little bit about the term Cerebite because a lot of people aren't familiar with the rules.
A Cerebite is a monk, and by name only, who simply obeys no rule. They claim they have one, but they really, in reality, obey no rule. They go wherever they want. They do whatever they want. They have they're given mass at contra, and that's all. And they should be at a monastery. They don't want to be at a monastery. It's kind of like idiorhythmic monks, but much worse, because even some idiorhythmic monks who were hermits would not be classified as Cerebites. A Cerebite's kind of like a busybody monk, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
All right. They don't listen to anybody. They do whatever they want. And St. Benedict condemns them. He says, look, you have to have a spiritual father. You have to have an abbot. You have to do these things if you want to be a monk. So they had a very negative view of monastics who simply repudiated having an abbot as a spiritual father. So that's what Archbishop Herman is saying to them. And Archbishop Herman tells the emperor, look, your majesty, put these people under arrest until we find out what's actually happened. Okay. So then Benzo continues. He says, they therefore remained with the archbishop in the court without the punishment of captivity. All right. So, well, let me correct myself. So they're not in prison, but they're basically under house arrest, if you know what I mean. All right. They can't leave yet. Okay. And behold, suddenly, what happens? The embassy of the Romans arrived, and they were amazed by the deceit of the monks. It was the will of all the bishops, therefore, that the Lord Emperor should bind these Cerebites with an oath, according to which they themselves should never become popes, nor should they intervene by any device in the election of the pope. All right? Now, at the bottom of the page, you can't see it, there's a note from the Council of Worms in 1076. And this is one of the anti-Hildebrandian councils. In this quote, it says, in the time of the Emperor Henry, this is the Council of Worms writing to Hildebrand now, okay, in 1076. I'm going to quote from it. Now remember, Hildebrand had taken an oath back in 1054 saying he's never going to be involved in electing popes, nor is he going to have himself ever elected pope, okay? Well, the Council of Worms in 1076 says, in the time of the Emperor Henry, you, Hildebrand, bound yourself by a corporeal oath never to accept the papacy yourself in the lifetime of the emperor or his son, or to allow another to receive it without the assent and approval of the father or the son. And still today there are, as witnesses to this oath, very many bishops who saw it then with their own eyes and heard it with their own ears. All right? So it seems that, I guess, Hildebrand just simply didn't think, just lied under oath, I guess, right? Okay, so next, page 371, I don't know if that's in the preview, but it says, and this was done, the oath was taken. What more is there to tell? All right, the Lord Victor, now this is Victor II, was elected and brought to Rome, and he was received with great happiness by the whole assembly of the Commonwealth and a solemn procession. The aforementioned acephalous men, or self-headed men, followed him, but they were not received into the Pope's secret councils. All right. So what's happening here is Victor is elected. Okay. There's still a Pope after the schism, but this is still a vague period happening. Okay. But one of the conditions apparently for Victor's election is that he's not to. These people are kind of not to be received into his secret chambers. Okay. Finally, Prandellis, that's another name for Hildebrand, now being shut out. That's me saying he's being shut out of everything. He has to find a solution to this. Okay. Finally, Prandellis, Benzo says, more cunning than the others, formed links with the bankers. This is getting interesting. Okay. Now, what are they talking about? They're talking about Hildebrand's alliance with the Pierleoni, who a Jewish banking family. All right. All right. Wishing
basically,
to be.
This is basically where Hildebrand starts getting his funding.
Yeah, it says now. In fact, it says in Benno's other work called the Works of the Roman Church, he says that Hildebrand filled his coffers and entrusted that money to the son of a certain Jew, recently baptized, but retaining the manners of the money changers whom he made his familiar. So Hildebrand's point is this. Now, look, he's out of Rome. Victor II's elected. I don't know the whole details behind the election of Victor II. We might go more into that later.
It sounds like that's more of a cleanup election because of the mess they were creating.
Yeah, so he's approved. I guess the emperor says, okay, we'll elect Victor. We'll allow him to become pope. But you cannot have Hildebrand, Humbert. These guys, they've caused too much trouble everywhere. Not only did Humbert and Hildebrand cause the great schism with between Rome and Constantinople, they also basically caused a breach later with England. All right, wherever Humbert went, some kind of catastrophe would follow. All right, so Victor can be made pope, but Hildebrand, Humbert, these other guys, look, they can't be. You cannot have them as advisors. They can't be around. So Hildebrand's at this point, what's happening? Look, he has no power. He's being shut out of everything. So he has to find other allies, all right? And he turns to the bankers, all right, to the Jews. And
is this also when he turns to the like certain groups in the Normans?
Well, he will in the future, all right? So now he's turning to the bankers, really the Pierleoni Jewish banking family, putatively baptized, but who knows, okay? Wishing to be acceptable to the Pope, at least in financial matters. So here's what happens. It says, Prandellis, more cunning than the others, formed links with the bankers, wishing to be acceptable to the Pope, at least in financial matters, and thus, whether the Pope liked it or not, he went in and out like a troublesome dog, although he was excluded from the fullness of his grace. So, Hildebrand's way to get back in is he makes an alliance with the bankers, he gets money, he becomes kind of a, you can go to Victor II, look, I have money, you want to build churches, you want to build poorhouses, you want to do this, at least accept my help on financial matters. All right? So he's excluded from the fullness of his grace, Benzo says, the grace of Victor, but at the same time, he's working his way in back through money. All right? After these events, grievous to relate, our Lord Emperor Henry, that's Henry III, left our earthly pilgrimage and was carried up to heaven. There remained a boy king, all right? And the boy king is Henry IV, with his imperial mother, that's the Empress Agnes, and the Romans broke their oath and wandered from the righteous way. For after a few days had passed, the Lord Victor died. All right? So Victor was elected in when?
1057.
Okay, so there were
1055 to 1057.
54, 50. Okay, so he was elected in that period. Okay, yeah, consecrated. He was consecrated in April of 1055. Okay, and he died.
Also worthy of note, Leo IX died on April 1054. Victor II isn't elected till April 1055, which means for an entire year, the Sarabites basically were acting in an unheated manner. So you have this period where basically no one knows what's going on.
I think I have an idea of what's going on. All right, with that, let me give you a little bit of speculation before we go on. Hildebrand, Humbert, the other fellows, they basically had to gain a lot of power in the Leo IX. They realized that if they cannot get their candidate elected, all right, so they're postponing papal election. Why? For a year, because they're trying to figure out what to do. All right, they finally realized, look, we got to go to the emperor, so let's go there first, and they go there on their own initiative. All right, and as we figure out, it wasn't on their own initiative. Later, a delegation of Roman clergy arrived. So That's my theory. I don't know for sure, but it would make sense. They're going to postpone the election, have a sedevacante period in Rome until they can figure out what they're going to do. Maybe not, but I wouldn't put it past them. Okay, so Victor dies, it says. And a new idol, Benzo says, was set up by the Romans in the Church of Constantine. All right? The new idol is Stephen IX. So Benzo does not have a very positive opinion of Stephen IX. All right? He's set up with that. The Romans rebel. There's some people living in Rome. They elect this Stephen IX without the imperial mandate, without the procedure. Hildebrand's behind it, most likely at this point. Probably going to get to that. Okay, and he's called an idol. And they put him in the Church of Constantine, which is the Lateran Basilica. Okay, so he's elected and made bishop on August 2nd, in 1057. Okay, Godfrey, who was called Duke, delighted in troubling the situation of the boy king, took money and made an alliance with him. All right, so Godfrey the Bearded. He was Duke of Upper Lower Thuringia. He's Margrave of Tuscany. Even. He dies in 1069, so not too long from that period. So remember here, what's happening? Well, the emperor at this time in the West is a young boy. He's like 10 years old, 9 years old. His mother is trying. The wife of Emperor Henry III is trying to run things. Okay, so this puts the imperial government in Germany and then in Italy in a very vulnerable position. All right. So everybody begins to try to take advantage of everything. Okay. So it says Prandellis, or Hildebrand, however, did not forget his association with those Cerebites, who were partners in his imposture. And he entered Siena, where together with Beatrice, that's the Margravine of Tuscany, all right, without the knowledge of the Romans, he set up another false and worthless idol. So after Stephen IX dies, Hildebrand has to set up another guy. Well, who is it? Nicholas II. Okay.
This is where we see now there's immediate opposition because keep in mind this is where I've got to put in. You have Nicholas. Hold on, I got to put this on the board because Nicholas II.
And by the way, Benedict the Tenth is still around. Let's not forget that. I don't think he's dead yet.
Oh wow!
Right? Because remember, he didn't come to the council. They anathematized him in Sutri, but he's still hanging around with his own claimants. Right?
And so we have Stephen IX, and then we have Nicholas II is after him. Benedict IX is in opposition to him. So now we've got another set of popes.
I think we can probably put Stephen IX and Nicholas II in the Hildebrandian line.
Okay.
All right, because they're engineered with his election without imperial mandate through the money he's throwing around. All right.
I can move that on the chart. That's no problem.
In fact, so-called Nicholas II, he was the one that who was the Italian bishop that wrote against him? Ulrich of Imola.
Yeah.
Bishop Ulrich of Imola was the one who wrote against Nicholas II for trying to abolish the married priesthood and diaconate. Right? And in fact, Nicholas II at one point, I think it was maybe Nicholas II was going to, being convinced by Hildebrand and others to pass a decree that was going to say that any ordination done with simony, and remember, they defined simony so broadly, it meant anything they wanted it to mean. If a nobleman gave you a set of vestments and then you were later ordained, that was considered simoniac ordination. All right. I mean, if a nobleman gave a church and then said, "Can the bishop please ordain this deacon to be a chaplain?" That's simony as far as they're concerned. And so, at one point, Nicholas II, I believe, was going to publish a decree declaring all these sacraments, ordinations, everything invalid. And they only pulled back at the last moment because they realized that would have been too crazy. All right. All right. So what happens? It says. He sets up this other false idol. Without the knowledge of the Romans, he set up another false and worthless idol, Nicholas II. So you can tell Benzo's opinion about these.
Benzo, where does Benzo put Benedict X? Does he put him in as a papal claimant, or does he put him as a legitimate pope?
I think he considers him like one of the papal claimants with Gregory VI and the otother guy. I can't remember the guy's name. He's kind of complicated because he calls him one of the three devils. So apparently Benzo. Didn't have a very good opinion of any of these claimants at that point.
Okay.
All right. And Benzo's Bishop of Alba. As one born in adultery, he ought not to be admitted to so great a mystery. Oh, well, this is interesting. All right. So, in other words, Nicholas II was born in adultery. Right? So he didn't have his mother wasn't married, or not mother. His mother was conceived through an adulterous relationship. And in fact, in the canons, there are actually issues about that, at least in local canons, going back to the first millennium, right? About issues of legitimization and such like that. Okay, so Benzo's saying, well, first off, he's disqualified for election to begin with because of basically him being born in adultery. Okay, not to be mean to people born in adultery. That's not what he's saying. He's saying there's standards.
But they did understand the difference between, say, a cohabitation and adultery. So if they said adultery, they meant adultery. He was a child of the family.
Yes. Okay. It says, "O Father," and then Benzo now gives kind of an exhortation to his readers. He says, "O fathers, senators, blessed ones of the eternal Father, reflect, decide, and bring Prandellas to judgment. Whereas the truth bears witness, he is proved guilty of many offenses. Firstly, because the election of the Pope in no way belongs to his office. Then, because he confirmed an oath that he would not do so, and by doing so, he has fallen into perjury. Furthermore, because evil was done, since he acted not together with the Romans, and not in Rome, but in the city of Siena, as if in a hyena's cave." All right. Finally, he bound that most wretched man by an oath to do nothing except according to his word or command. A word of command. So, why did Hildebrand want someone like Nicholas II elected? Because apparently he made him take an oath saying, "You're going to do whatever I say." Now that's interesting. Why would he want a man born in adultery elected pope? Well, blackmail. Do you remember a few years ago, many years ago, maybe 20 years ago now, there was a U.S. House representative from Illinois, and I'll relate this. But I'll tell you how they thought of it. This is why. And his name was Dennis Hastert. He had been a high school
I remember. Yeah.
He had been a high school teacher, coach. Then suddenly he got elected to Illinois State House. Then suddenly the next 2 or 3 years he became U.S. House of Representatives, and then he became Speaker of the House. It was a meteoric rise. And of course, later it was discovered he was a child molester. He was molesting teenagers all throughout this entire time. So why did he get put in this position? Well, it's obvious. If people have morally compromised or they have skeletons in their closet, you put people like that in charge, and then you can blackmail them. They do whatever you want. They're your creature, if you know what I mean. The Soviets did the same thing in Russia with the Moscow Patriarchate, by the way. Right?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I do have the text on this page, so I can continue.
Okay, go ahead.
If you want.
Continue from it says, "Finally he bound."
Yeah. Finally he bound that most wretched man by an oath to do nothing except according to his word of command. There is worse to come that seriously vexes the heart. O heaven, O earth, why do you not show your anger? Men are insensible if they do not demonstrate their horror at such fantastical conduct. Prandellas corrupted the Romans with much money and many perjuries and held a synod, in which he crowned his idol with a royal crown. When the bishops saw this, they became like dead men. And then he begins to describe
this is the beginning. This is the beginning of the papal tiara.
Right. Okay. On the lower circlet of this crown, the inscription could be read, "The crown of the kingdom from the hand of God." And on the other circlet, thus, "The diadem of the empire from the hand of Saint Peter." Seek out.
So this point, temporal claims are being asserted. The diadem of the empire from the hand of Saint Peter.
And then it says, "See," but now look at the response. So he doesn't. It doesn't. He says when he says they became like dead men, he says, "Seek out the book of Augustine on the city of God and learn what the dreadful hand of Emperor Pompey wrought in a case of similar act of presumption." And the reason he brings this up is because the assertion of what he's writing on the papal crown, what we would call the papal tiara now, was so offensive to God. If I remember correctly, how did Emperor Pompey, and I haven't read The City of God in a while, but I want to say it was like burned to death or something.
He might be talking about with one of the. I don't know if there was an Emperor Pompey. I think there was a Roman king named Pompey back in the Roman kingdom, but I understand the point. Notice he says the bishops, even the bishops who had gone along so far with Hildebrand's candidate Nicholas II, they became like dead men when they see what happens. All right. So this is a direct assault on what? Symphonia. It's a direct promotion of supreme temporal and ecclesiastical powers. All right. So all the people who claim that the papacy had complete dominion over the West back in the 850s, even
nobody had a clue.
Even under Nicholas I, he had trouble even asserting what he was trying to assert. All right. And what he found was large-scale rejection of even his claims in the West. So at this point, we're now coming back for Nicholas II, Nicholas I. Notice, that's interesting. Notice he has the name Nicholas II, and Hildebrand probably chose that name for him. He's his creature. All right, so he's hearkening back to Nicholas I, but on steroids. Okay.
So what we notice here is that Nicholas II also was well known for he designated the College of Cardinals the sole body of electors in the document in nomine domini. So keep this in mind. He basically limited the papal election, which used to be held between the emperor, the people, the bishops, and so the whole College of Cardinals thing that's also never existed before. That was literally happening right now.
The College of Cardinals was simply the original meaning was the leading people.
Right.
The cardinal people. That's all it meant.
The cardinal clergy of Rome. But the point I'm trying to make is
also the senators. The senators in Rome too were involved in the elections. All right.
So this is something to keep in mind, that from the papal diadem to the claims of temporal authority to the College of Cardinals even electing the Pope, this is all happening 4 or 5 years after the Schism of 1054. This did not exist 4 or 5 years before the Schism of 1054. So when people say, it was a gradual disconnection between East and West, no, they were literally creating the Roman Catholic Church right now. So we continue. Do you want me to?
If you have the page, continue. It should be page 373.
Yep. Meanwhile, Prandellis gave fodder to his Nicholas in the Lateran palace like an ass in a stall. The Nicolite did nothing that was not ordered by the Sarabite. It is shameful to relate how many men of distinction were struck down by the madness of Prandellis through the excommunicating tongue of his frenzied herald. Anno of Cologne stood up to avenge his own injury and that of others, having ascertained the fact that the man was born of an adulterous relationship. On the unanimous advice of the Orthodox, he sent him a letter of excommunication, and after he saw it, grieving and groaning, he departed from this life.
Okay, stop here for a second. Anno II is Archbishop of Cologne. The Archbishop of Cologne was one of the metropolitans in Germany, one of the most powerful ecclesiastical primates. And they didn't, the concept that, Hildebrand got Nicholas elected and everybody just did whatever he wanted. Well, no. What happens is the metropolitan, the primate of Cologne, sends Nicholas II a letter saying, look, you're excommunicated, you're anathematized. And Nicholas reads it and apparently, so upset about what's happening, he dies.
Now, I will say this, Lydia. Now, Alexander Brown asks a very interesting question, which I think is perfectly relevant. I do want to put it up here, because what he says is, so are Hildebrandians like Stephen and Nicholas considered valid popes from an Orthodox view? I know the schism was in effect, but were they heretics yet? I would say Nicholas II was definitely a heretic. Stephen IX, didn't he live like a year? I don't know, but he was still considered a puppet by many of the Western bishops, including Benzo. So I don't know that they would.
Sure, I would say I have no problem in saying they're heretics. Now, maybe not everybody knew about their heresies. You have to have a certain degree about did people know what was actually happening. But I would not regard them as Orthodox Pope. I'd have to say they're more than schismatics. They're going into the heretic range. All right.
Yeah, they're already weirdos in the eyes of their own Episcopal contemporaries. So I would not. They're
being according to Benzo, Archbishop Anno of Cologne, on the unanimous advice of the Orthodox, basically anathematized Nicholas II.
Yeah. So
he's largely speaking for the German Episcopate at that point.
And that would mean he's speaking for basically the remainder of Western Orthodoxy in Germany. And so because we haven't gotten to the program yet where they begin to start removing bishops on that, but they will. So we continue. Hold on, let me get the book again. The Romans, indeed, mindful of better things, met together and promised to make amends for their sins against the boy king. They therefore sent him the mantle, mitre, the ring and circlet of the patrician by the hands of the bishops, the cardinals and senators, and through those who seem to be more eminent among the people. As soon as they appeared at court, however, the nobility were summoned from the whole of Italy and other kingdoms, for it seemed to the Lady Empress and her counselors that the gifts from Rome ought not to be received except in the presence of the foremost men of the kingdoms. Meanwhile, as they waited for them, Prandellis had not forgotten his cunning. He became anxious and began to twist and turn. He sought out Richard of Capua and brought him to the city on condition of paying him £1,000 so that he might provide him with help in setting up the new Antichrist.
Now, Richard of Capua is the Prince of Capua, by the way. Okay.
And what more is there to tell? Richard took the money and attempted to bring the heretic of Lucca to St. Peter ad Vincula. The heretic of Lucca, that's Anselm of Lucca.
No, yeah, that's Alexander II, so-called.
To St. Peter ad Vincula, but the Romans resisted him with weapons of war. There was great slaughter on both sides, and so the day ended. Richard, however, aided by the dark gloom of the night, advanced by another route, and with bloody hands he enthroned the Pope of the night and conveyed him to the Lateran Palace. Behold, a battle between angels and devils. While the king, together with the bishops, appointed their post justly and lawfully.
Stop here for a second. Who is the Pope appointed justly and properly? By the Emperor, the bishops, and others. That's Catalyst of Parma. This is now we're entering Catalyst of Parma. Okay,
Catalyst is second, right?
Honorius II, Catalyst of Parma.
Oh, Honorius is okay. So we can put him on the Roman side.
Yes, he's a legitimate Roman Pope. And his opponent is Alexander II, or Anselm of Lucca, who had to be installed basically when they had, in order for Hildebrand to install his next creature, he had to call him the Prince of Capua and pay him a bunch of money and to bring in troops.
Okay, give me a moment while I properly add Honorius II, who was the Pope from 1061 to 1072. I would say we're getting to the last popes of the Roman Church. 1060, what did I say? 1064 to 1061 to 1072. Okay. And meanwhile, they had added who on the Hildebrandian side?
Anselm of Lucca or / Alexander II, the anti-pope Alexander II.
Okay,
I call him he's anti-pope from my perspective.
Well, yeah. Well, they like to say that Honorius II is the anti-pope, but we know from reading history right here that clearly the real anti-pope was Alexander II.
And we can say / Anselm of Lucca, just so we understand what we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay.
And he claims the papacy from 1061 to 1073.
Anselm?
Yes.
All right, so we continue on.
Okay, so behold a battle between angels and devils.
Behold a battle between angels and devils. While the king, together with the bishops, appointed their pope justly and lawfully, Prandellis, on the other hand, together with the Normans, appointed theirs simonically.
Why does it say simonically? Because what? Hildebrand, with his the Pierleoni banking family, used all of his funds and money to install Anselm of Lucca. So if that's actually, you can call that simony, all right? Simony's not a nobleman giving you a set of vestments. That's not simony. Simony's paying a potentate a lot of money and bringing in some mercenaries and killing a lot of people. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It says, what an appointment. This man of Lucca, called Alexander, originally invented the Papacy and betrayed to enemies the secret of his lord archbishop. We can.
The Pateria. Now we're getting to the Gnostic heretics. All right, the Pateria believed that they were opposed to married men, legitimately married men, being ordained subdeacons, deacons, and presbyters, and having children with their wives after that. They even went to the extreme of demanding extreme degrees of asceticism from even regular lay people. They were basically kind of a crypto-Gnostic sect. At this point, the Hildebrandians are trying to support them. Okay, they're later going to be condemned. But Benzo sees what these Pateria are. Okay, so Anselm of Lucca, he's the inventor of the Paterine heretics. All right, so he's apparently okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so It gets, yeah, I'm reading it. This is actually kind of stomach turning as I read it.
And he betrayed to enemies the secrets of his lord, Archbishop, to whom he had taken oath. Now, what's that referring to? Guido was the Archbishop of Milan, who had originally ordained Anselm a priest, I believe, okay? Or consecrated him to the priesthood, okay, or the bishopric. And basically he, turned around and betrayed him, okay?
And then it says, this man, to the enemies of his secret lord archbishop to whom he had taken an oath. Together with his close kinsman Landolfinus, he abused a certain nun. Such a man was raised over the Christian people, and what is dreadful to hear, let alone to see, he was crowned like a king in the synod. Judge rightly, you sons of men, whether indeed you speak righteousness, whether such an illusion of demons ought to reign in holy church, whether any monk can create a pope of any kind, illegitimate, simoniac, or heretical. For to do whatever one wishes with impunity, that is to be a king. Why does not the whole world rise up against the monstrous behavior of this new Proteus and the heretical wickedness of a second Arius? Where are men like Herman of Cologne? Where are men like Aribo of Mainz? Where are they and also those men who are not commemorated in writing? Monks and women put bishops to flight as if Hercules was in pursuit. Monks, I say, and what monks? Branded with perjury, defiled with the debauching of nuns. And these are the creators of popes, bringing disgrace on those who are truly the rulers of churches.
Now let me stop here for a second. Notice that everything that the Hildebrandians claim against their opponents, how they're simoniacs, how they're sleeping with all these women, which they really mean married clergy, how everything they claim actually turns out to be the truth about them, about who the Hildebrandians.
Yep.
All right. And notice how Hildebrand is called a second Arius as far as Benzo is concerned. And Arius is one of the greatest heresiarchs in history. All right. So who were men like Herman of Cologne? Erbo was Archbishop of Mainz. Herman of Cologne was the one who originally, a few pages back, when they had, after Leo IX died and this delegation of Hildebrand arrived, Archbishop Herman of Cologne's like, I don't believe these guys are representing the Roman Church, and asked the emperor to hold them at the court until the real Roman delegation arrived. All right? So Benzo is recalling, look what Archbishop Herman did. He actually temporarily kept Hildebrand from taking over the Roman Church for at least a year or something like that. All right? Aribo of Mainz, I don't know quite as much about him. He was Archbishop of Mainz up into 1031. But apparently, these were people that Benzo is saying were of great value to the West. But now, something's happening, obviously, and we know what's happening. Okay, continue, Father.
Truly, those whom Prandellis planted were grass. They lived as long as he wished, and went the way of all flesh when he wished. Finally, when it pleased him that the man of Lucca, whom he called Alexander, should depart, he ordered Archigenes, that's a famous physician.
It's a literary name. Archigenes was a famous ancient physician. He's referring. Right. He's not naming the name of the doctor, but he's saying he was a famous Italian doctor at the time.
Yeah, to come and cut open a vein so that the loss of blood, the soul might be divorced from the body.
So so in other words, he killed Anselm of Lucca, Alexander II, after he thought he outlived his usefulness.
Yeah.
Right? Immediately, now it's time for Hildebrand to take over. Okay.
Yeah. Immediately, the streets were full of running feet. Money loosened the reins of generosity. Everyone had not only his purse, but even his sack stuffed full of Byzantine coins, so that Philibrandus might be seized, taken prisoner, and might be dragged, as if unwilling, to the sea.
So now he's administering his election. He's saying, now it's time. Hildebrand finally wants to be pope. Anselm of Lucca is dragging on. He brings in a physician with the proposition of treating him. They murder him. Hildebrand spends money liberally on the mob, the mob of people.
Right.
And they pretend as if, I don't want to be pope, but everybody's, dragging him there. All right. So this is kind of an engineered event, all right, to make it seem like he's an unwilling candidate. Okay, go ahead.
All Rome resounds with shouts, and clean money confers both noble birth and beauty. The business was completed. The demon called Legion was raised on high. The man in the monk's cowl was crowned. Wearing the mitre, he went to the capital. Those who were present saw this proverb: if a servant mounts a horse, madness drives him. O malady beyond maladies, O griefs beyond the griefs of death, that a sacrilegious man, an adulterer, a perjurer, a murderer, a pope murderer besides, leprous in body and soul, sorcerer, Sabirites, that bedecked with such pearls, becomes a citizen of Peter. And although he stank of so much dung, he despised all men, and he even cursed some of them. For a vessel reeks of whatever it may contain. But if this blasphemer reviles any of the faithful, it is as if the devil had inflicted an injury on Michael. Everyone is praised or branded with infamy according to his works, for his works follow him. Truly, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. He who does the work of the devil is the slave of the devil. The false monk's cowl has therefore become the heart of the devil. His curse is therefore worth nothing, since he himself is cursed and a liar, like the father of lies from the beginning. The hand that clears away filth must be clean. Who does not know the rest? He was driven from the city and is rotting.
So this is what's this referring to? Benzo reposes around 1089, 1090.
Right.
At this time, the imperial government and Clement III had already driven Hildebrand out. All right, and Clement III is now in Rome.
Right. He's Pope 1082. I'm going to add him to the chart.
Yes. So we mentioned. Yes, because he Benzo kind of skips over everything that happened late. He doesn't go into all the other details because this is a very short work he's writing here. All right, but at this point, Benzo feels elated. Look, we're winning. Hildebrand is on the run. We have control of Rome again. Everything seems to be improving. All right, and I'll finish reading the rest while you put that there.
Well, to be fair, I do want to get back to because even though Benzo skips over the point because he was living through it.
Yeah.
The short period in which Hildebrand had taken power in Rome was also the period where he wrote the Dictatus Papae, which we've referenced in our first episode on the matter. And so this is where he kind of tries to solidify the view, and this is where the Synod in Brixen takes place in 1080. And this is where Hildebrand is deposed, and he's driven out of the city. And so from Benzo's position, he's thinking the church is in great hands now. Hildebrand's out, things are better. And that's not true, but he doesn't know that because he's not reading.
Well, Benzo dies
years later.
Benzo dies in 1089. When Benzo dies, Clement III is on the rise.
Yeah, Clement III is in Rome reigning.
Yes.
So the point is,
remember, Ravenna at this point is also supporting Clement III because remember, Clement III was originally Archbishop Weber of Ravenna.
Yeah, right.
And Ravenna was always considered, or at least de facto, if not de jure, the second see in the West. All right, like at councils they would have, like at the for example, when they have the Lateran Synod of 769, that was like the third Roman Synod in the 700s that anathematized the iconoclasts. Right under the name of the Bishop of Rome at the time is mentioned the Archbishop of Ravenna, and that's actually very common. Okay, so anyway, if you want to continue, Father, the last sentences.
Yeah, give me just 1 second. I just want to make sure I've put everything in the chart because by now the chart is looking kind of crazy. But this is my point that we're at right now.
It's out of focus for some reason, by the way.
Oh, hold on. I'll fix that again. Hold on. Give me a moment. All I have to do is stop the screen. Then I just put back the screen. So give me just a moment. Okay. All right. So now it's nice and back and focused. And I think.
Can you increase the size? Can you zoom in a little bit more?
Yeah, I can make it big. Yeah, because hold on. I just want. Yeah. Okay. We can kind of go past the line, I think. All right, so maybe I'll move this here, and then so the point is that I'll make it bigger after that. But the point I'm trying to make is so from Benzo's perspective, things are now better, and the truth of the matter is things have only just started because Hildebrand is still plotting in exile somewhere. I don't even remember where he was at the time.
He dies in exile. Now remember. They oftentimes speak about the walk of Canossa, where Emperor Henry IV was made to walk barefoot to beg forgiveness from Hildebrand. Why did he do that? Well, he did that because Hildebrand and his supporters have been writing to Henry's mother. They got the ears of his relatives. They basically caused, life to be a living heck for him. Right? And however, after Henry did the walk of Canossa, almost immediately, almost being in Canossa, he began to dislike Hildebrand again. All right. So there's not much importance can be. The only importance that can be given to the whole walk to Canossa is the humiliation it brought to the imperial authority in the West.
Right.
This is what Hildebrand wanted, because it didn't matter that Henry's like. Then it didn't matter that Clement III and other figures could say, "Look, you shouldn't have done this, and this is wrong, and you have to go to confession," because at this point, Hildebrand has gained a massive propaganda victory, which is more important to him than actually controlling Rome or Ravenna or Milan or any of these other places. All right, he can say, "I made the emperor walk bare feet and come and beg me for forgiveness." Now he can admit the fact that the emperor later changed his mind, but that's extremely important to Hildebrand. He humiliates the imperial authority.
And so now, with this in mind, hold on one moment. Just make sure I'm in the right spot. Okay, let me see. And so let's see here. Where do we stop?
Begin with the hand that clears away filth.
Okay, hold on. The hand that clears away filth must be clean. Who does not know the rest? He was driven from the city and is rotting. The devil has no blessing, and there is no way that he can bless. Indeed, he possesses a curse, because he is accursed. If perhaps he casts over the faithful what is his own, there is no doubt that he does them no harm. For how can the root of evil impart by inheritance what he does not possess? It is clear from conclusive proofs that the Sarabite Frandelus was not a pope, nor were they pope those Satans whom he transformed into angels of light. Whoever thinks differently about this is an enemy of the Catholic faith and cannot be saved. And I don't have the next page. So.
Well, that's the end of that's the complete translation. The book is about 8 books, and they only translate book 7, I believe, or book 8 in there. So that's it, simply the end of that translation there. So, what else can we mention?
Well, it mentions here about the rotting that basically Hildebrand left Rome in June 1084. And so basically Benzo was just referring to his power being extinguished. So at this point, this is the end of Benzo's story, because he dies in 1089 thinking that everything is, hunky-dory. Pope Clement III is in office. There's still chaos going on because the agents of Hildebrand are still working in other areas. So this is where we have, we didn't even get into the Norman invasion of England.
Now, I can't find, on academia.u, there's a translation of some of Benzo of Alba's other works, and I could not find it. I have to go look for it. But if you go, you can find somewhat a reasonably reliable secondary source material, which I generally don't bring up, but I'll bring up for this point. There's a book called Cambridge Medieval History, the Eastern Roman Empire from 717 to 1453, edited by Henry Melville Gwartkin, and I'll put a link in the chat, so in case you want to bring it up.
Okay.
And go to page 597 if you could. It's in the private chat.
Hold on a moment. All right, I'm going to share the link also with everyone here, so we can do that. Give me just a moment while I get to the book. Let me open up this. And you said page 500 what?
597.
Okay, give me a moment. Oh, okay, it's right here. So let's just switch this over from the chart to the screen and switch to this particular book. Okay, and now we can just increase the size here. All right, and so what am I looking at here?
Okay, you see the second paragraph?
Yeah. Okay, so...
Okay. Go down to what says the political... Read the
political basis. The political basis. The political basis on which the Union might have been built up was removed. In 1062, the Emperor Constantine X made a fruitless attempt at Rome to secure the election of a pope pledged to the alliance with Byzantium. As a result of an intrigue engineered by the Piedmontese bishop Benzo and Pantaleone, a merchant of Amalfi and high repute in Constantinople, Catulus, Bishop of Parma, was elected pope under the style of Honorius II and was opposed to the candidate of reform, Alexander II. But in 1064, Catulus, who sought asylum in Castle Sant'Angelo, was driven from Rome, and with him the plan of an alliance against the Normans disappeared. In 1071, the capture of Bari by Robert Guiscard completed the fall of the imperial power in South Italy. The time was not far off, where on the very territory of the empire, the Basileus would have to fight the Normans, now become allies and protectors of the Pope. So effectively,
he's giving. To be honest, the author is kind of giving a pro Hildebrand. I mean, without realizing it. King, it was engineer the intrigue, as if Stephen the Ninth wasn't elected under intrigue, or Alexander the Second, or Nicholas the Second. All right.
It assumes that the Hildebrandian line is the valid line.
Yeah. So what do we find is happening? This is a result of this is a fruitless attempt was made to secure the election of a pope pledged to the alliance with the Byzantium. Well, who was the pope pledged to the alliance with the Byzantium? It was Catalyst the Farmer. Why? Because he was anti-Norman. All right. So the emperor is not going to make an alliance with Alexander II, who was having the protection of the Normans. All right. Now, in another work, Catalyst the Farmer does bring this out, where he talks about an ambassadors came to Rome during the time that Honorius II or Catalyst the Farmer was in charge, and Alexander was driven out. And they consider, and at least from the perspective of the emperor, I don't know what ecclesiastical mandate they brought. I don't know if the communion was officially restored, but at least the imperial government at that point was willing to call Honorius II the pope. And why wouldn't they? Technically, technically the Emperor Constantine X was in some sort of a alliance, at least formally, with the German emperor. And they had no love for the Normans, who were assaulting their territories.
Yeah.
Okay. So, if you want to.
Yeah. Henceforth, then. Well, do you want me to keep reading,
it's some interesting material, but we're going to get too far off if we go any further.
Right. Now, one question I'd gotten from Alexander in the Discord chat beforehand is, how did this affect other territories in Europe that were in the Western area? And the reactions were different.
Northern Italy did not recognize Hildebrand. They recognized Catalyst of Parma, or Honorius II. When they talk about the Lombard bishops, the Lombard bishops means everything basically like, I don't know, it's not just Lombardy, which is a smaller province in Italy. It means everything like 20 miles north of Rome, all the way up to, if you know what I mean by that, like 20 miles above Rome, then everything to the Italian border, or what would have been the Italian border. All right. At one point, the Hildebrandians did drive out the Archbishop of Milan, and they were able to install their own pseudo Bishop of Milan. However, the other bishoprics that were around never recognized them. This is also part of why the Pateria were so important, because they were terrorizing everybody in the neighborhood. Were terrorizing everybody in the countryside of Milan in an attempt to install their own bishops there. In fact, even Bishop Benzo, who's bishop in Alba. Now, Alba, I'm not sure if where's Alba? Is that in northern Italy? Alba in Italy?
Alba, Italy, I think.
It says it's Piedmontese. Piedmont, that's northern Italy, I believe.
Yeah.
So Bishop Benzo is basically a northern Italian bishop. That would have been other. He would have recognized either Ravenna, or he would have recognized Milan as his primate in that area. So England, the Normans invaded England. However, there was some sort of breach that transpired around 1070 or so between. What happened was that after Nicholas II died, or Alexander II before Hildebrand, after he died, the Humbert had some sort of mission to England. It was a disaster. The Norman king didn't want, at least in England, his policy was that he did not want the bishops to recognize anybody. So England kind of maintained, at least the Norman in control at the time, maintained kind of a policy of neutrality into the 1090s. Until Anselm of Canterbury came in, and then he kind of worked on everything. Germany has a role generally for Honorius and for Clement III. Spain, I think only. Spain
is a huge, weird case.
Spain's a much more complicated. The Pole, it was, you would have divided areas, but at one point, Clement III did have something like 2/3 of Western Europe recognize him, or 3/4. It was a majority at one point.
Now, one thing to keep in mind is that in the case of Spain, it was actually under Moorish domination right up until the edge of this period with Alfonso VI. So when Alfonso VI began reuniting parts of the kingdom, he began looking for guidance because he wanted to establish that Spain was, in fact, part of Europe. And so what he does is he reaches out to ask for help to ask for advice from Hildebrand, which is how the Council of Burgos in 1080 ends up destroying the Mozarabic Rite. and he immediately puts his daughters out in marriages with counts of other kingdoms, so that he can establish his legitimacy as a Christian king. So basically, he just sucked up to Hildebrand and destroyed the traditional right of Spain.
Well, there was actually support for Catalyst of Parma and Wiebert of Ravenna or Clement III in Spain.
Really?
There's actually a book about it. Yes, they actually had support in Spain.
That's interesting.
In fact, one of the attempts to impose the Roman Rite over the Mozarabic or the old Spanish Rite was interesting, because when they brought some monks from Cluny and they were made bishops.
Yeah. Okay.
There were several Cluniac monks. The first generation did not, in fact, want to abolish the Spanish Rite, because they were taught that it was this heretical, evil, like schismatic thing. And then they got there and they read it and they're like, well, there's nothing bad about it. And so they had to, in fact, get rid of the first quote unquote reforming bishops they had brought in from Cluny and bring in a whole nother group.
Now that's interesting, because I'd never heard that, and I thought, I mean, I've read a lot about this, but that makes a lot of sense, because Hildebrand basically
remember Cluny had about 1,000 monks. It was multiple monasteries. It was a humongous institution. Yeah, that's why in fact in the early 11th century there's a Rudolf Glaber, the historian, who died in like 1025, was a monk in Cluny, and he was, if you read his texts and his histories, he talks about how it's shameful if a bishop of the Apostolic See claims he can violate the canons or depose bishops without councils or interfere in the territory of any bishop, because Rudolf Glaber, the monk of Cluny, says, who died in 1020 or so, he says that each bishop is representing Christ in each see. So my point is that Cluny could be malleable, amorphous. It's like saying, so when you brought off some, talking about Cluny is almost like saying to some extent, we brought some monks from Mount Athos, and bishops, and they're going to do what we want to do.
There's so many people, yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
You could have the monasteries under control, but that doesn't mean you're going to control all the monks, all the skeets, and it might take a few times for you to get somebody you want to do whatever you want.
Now, and one thing to keep in mind is that while Hildebrand wanted to destroy the Mozarabic Rite because he saw it as adoptionist, Alfonso wanted to destroy the Mozarabic Rite because he saw it as Arabized, and so from his perspective, he wanted to completely have a clean break from anything that had to do with the Umayyad Caliphate. So unfortunately, that was really ignorant, but yeah, that's why he did it.
It's quite ridiculous because, well, first off, it's when we call it the Mozarabic Rite, that's really an anachronism.
Right. It should probably be called the Spanish Rite.
It's the old Spanish Rite or the Hispanic Rite. And now, if you go to this other book, which is called Byzantium and Crusades by Jonathan Harris, another secondary source again. I give you the link here.
Okay.
You go to page 52.
All right, hold on. Oh, I see. Okay, I see.
I'm bringing this up because I can't find the academia.edu translation of the discussion between Catalyst of Parma and the Emperor in Byzantium, Constantinople, the Roman Emperor.
Catalyst of Parma is which, Honorius II, or
Honorius II? Yes.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go by legit papal titles if he got an election. Give me a moment.
Okay.
I'm gonna change that. We're going to go to page 52. Okay, it's on page 52. And let's see if it changed in the StreamYard. Yep, it did. All right, so let's
go down to the section that says, that did not mean, though.
Okay, that did not mean, okay, hold on. Plus. That did not mean, though, that the Byzantines ceased to cultivate the Pope. Instead, as the likelihood of an anti-Norman alliance faded, the approaches began to be made in a different way with a different object in view. Rather than use the Pope as an ally, the Byzantines began to try to enlist his help in their endless efforts to recruit Western mercenaries. An early example of this shift came in May 1062 when 3 Byzantine envoys arrived in Rome bearing letters from the emperor. The embassy had been carefully timed. The previous year there had been a disputed papal election. When one group of cardinals had elected the Bishop of Lucca as Pope Alexander II, another group had raised Peter Catalyst, the Bishop of Parma, as Honorius II. Honorius and his supporters then occupied Rome, and the Byzantines' hope was that he would reverse the papacy's new policy of friendship with the Normans. This attempt to exploit a papal system came to nothing for the supporters of Alexander II, ousted Honorius from Rome very shortly afterwards. The significance of the episode lies in a peculiar suggestion that the emperor was reported to have made in his letter to the Pope. He urged Honorius II to lead an expedition to liberate Jerusalem and the Holy Sepulchre from infidel rule. At first sight, it is puzzling why the emperor should link the opposition of the Normans with the liberation of Jerusalem. It is possible that the source of information has garbled or misunderstood the exact tenor of the emperor's message, but the arrival of the Byzantine ambassadors was not reported by someone remote or informed, but by Benzo, Bishop of Alba, who was present at Rome at the time as the envoy of the Western Emperor Henry IV. So,
okay, so what's happening here, Father Joseph?
Well, what's happening here is that effectively the Byzantines are already aware that there is a schism in Rome. And they know which side to choose because the Normans are attacking with the help of the Hildebrandians, so they're going to choose the side of the Romans. And it seems like they had their ideas right. Unfortunately,
but there's something wrong also, and what's wrong is this: imperial policy in the Roman imperial policy in Constantinople, unfortunately, is being guided wrongly more by concerns for getting Western mercenaries. All right, so why do they eventually shift away from friendliness to claim of the third, which actually happened? There was an ambassador. I think we did one program about this. Some of the Southern Greek archbishops met with Clement III, and there were a few other cases, and they suddenly shift to Urban II. Well, it's because Urban II begins to call for a crusade. So it's one of the shameful episodes. Not imperial authority doesn't mean it does. I mean, in promoting symphonia doesn't mean everything the emperor does is great. It doesn't even mean that people can't bungle situations or such.
Well, the worst part of this is that ultimately that set the seeds for the finality of the Great Schism. And what I mean by that is because obviously the emperor had the idea of possibly marching on Jerusalem, and he gave this idea to Honorius II, who was the legal pope from the Roman standpoint.
Well, the German emperor had already told the Roman emperor in Constantinople, "Look, I don't think I can do this." Because he was constantly asking the German Emperor Henry IV to come with troops,
right?
And it's expensive.
But here's my point: is that Honorius II and Clement III were aware of this, but so were the Hildebrandians. So they knew exactly what the Byzantines wanted. So when we get to 1100 with Urban II, and Urban II, what's the first thing he does? He says, "Hey, let's go form an alliance to take out."
It's actually earlier than 1100. It's actually in the early 1090s. Okay, continue.
But you get my point, is that they showed their hand, and the Hildebrandians then knew what cards to play.
Yeah,
and
they know that they know that the old, let's call it the old Western Party, the original Orthodox Roman Party. They already know, the Hildebrandians know that Honorius and Clement, those people, they're already being targeted for discussions by Constantinople. So, again, like you said, what's their solution? Their solution is to get involved in the situation and to offer, look, we can do more. And in fact, this was not you can look at the successor to the Hildebrandians back in the 1430s, or around 14, during the, when you had, it was obviously greatly after the schism, and you had, the West was separated from the church. But remember, you had the Council of Basel, which had already deposed Martin or Eugene or something like that. He was then claiming, there was that time another papal schism.
Yeah.
And there were two delegations that showed up in Constantinople. One was representative of the French bishops in Basel, who had already declared a pope can be deposed. They'd already limited papal authority. And then there was the others representing Eugene, kind of the more ultramontane party.
Right.
And ultimately, the emperor chose what? He chose
the ultramontane party.
Because what? They were in control of cities in Italy. They had money. The Italian city-states were a naval power. To him, I guess, the fact that he had already a group of Western bishops, even though they're in schism and heresy, but if they're already have decided that ultramontanism is wrong, if they've already kind of turned the clock back, if the emperor in Constantinople had been more interested in actually finding a positive situation to bring people back to orthodoxy, well, who's the choice? Gallicans in the 1400s or ultramontanes? Well, obviously Gallicans, but the emperor didn't choose that. All right.
Yeah, as we can therefore.
But that's a little bit later. My point is that the Hildebrandians, whether then or their successors, kind of knew how to get involved and to tell people exactly what they wanted to hear, especially the emperor in Constantinople. All right.
Yeah. Now,
and with money, obviously they have a lot of money. Hildebrands, allies with the banking families, And as a result, the German emperors had generally negative views of the banking plans in Italy. And, anyway, go ahead.
Okay, now Atomic Lead had a few questions. One of them I can answer really fast, and the other one I want to give to you on this because you know more about this than I do. And the first thing he said is, so the Kenosis incident was exaggerated into some big thing that demonstrated the submission of the temporal power to the spiritual. Yes. So we'll get to the next question, which was, how much of the whole investiture controversy, Gregorian reform, comes from ideas coming out of Cluny? Now, you had mentioned a lot about Cluny. I don't know how involved they really were. They really involved? I don't. I don't know.
Again, Cluny had about 1,000 monks and various houses around it. I wouldn't put it past it. I know I'm not going to defend everything going. It's like someone saying, what is your opinion about Mount Athos now? I'm going to say generally probably negative. I'm not going to get involved in that except for one monastery and a few other skeets. But I can't just say all of Mount Athos is evil. Or all of Mount Athos is fallen. All right. So
yeah, because when you're dealing with, especially when you're dealing
I'd rather do another show about Cluny and get some other primary source documents together, because I have a feeling probably there was support. Because what happens with Hildebrand, with Humbert, with these other fellows, is that if they control the narrative about how the canons are presented, all right, which they did. Remember, they created their own canonical collections, and they can present canonical, for example, they can present papal rescripts from the 500s as if they were active decisions. Okay, a rescript either by the emperor, a magistrate, a pope, a patriarch, is when a question is asked, you're asked to give your opinion, and you give your opinion in a forceful manner, although in traditional canonical legal terms understood that it's not necessarily binding on anybody, okay? Well, what do? They gather up all these papal rescripts, they edit them, and then they say, look, these were decrees issued by the popes in the 400s, 500s, and everybody had to obey it, all right? So do you see, that's an example, my point, of how they can control the narrative there. So, maybe they propagated this among some of the monks there. I don't really know. I've heard people say Cluny was involved in it. I'd have to say that that's probably true to some extent. But just hearing monk Rudolf Glaber, though, writing in his 4-volume history, saying that the bishop of the Apostolic See who's a Cluniac monk, saying the bishop of the Apostolic See does not have power to suspend or depose bishops without trial, nor can he interfere in their own diocese, because each bishop is a bishop of the Apostolic See. That tells me that at least there were probably people in Cluny who had other ideas. Because remember, most of the monks are just going to be regular, illiterate people, all right, who become monks. They maybe learn some enough Latin to sing the divine office, or they do it by memory. You're not necessarily talking about, all the educated, people and such either.
Right, and so we'd have to do a show on it, because you'd have to look at the distinctions and the groups. I'm sure that the Hildebrandians, to me, it seems more based on what you're saying, Vladika, that frankly the Hildebrandians infected Cluny before Cluny infected the Hildebrandians.
I don't believe this all came out of nothing. I believe there was something going on for some time, at least for a few years.
Yeah,
because Rome is in chaos for 30, 40 years. So even when they had the schism between 1015 between Rome and Constantinople, well, at least when the diptychs, the mention of Rome was dropped around 1012 or 1015. Now that's a debate point as to why. Some people claim it's because the Emperor Henry II had the Filioque sung in the Creed. We don't really know that. That's just supposition. We know that when he went to Rome, he asked if the Credo could be sung because it wasn't being sung in the Roman Mass at the time, where he used the Mass in Rome. Maybe that's why, maybe it's not. It was unusual for people to be dropped off from the diptychs. The other point is that, okay, go ahead.
Well, no, Alexander Brown has a question. I know that you know a lot about this. But what about kingdoms in Scandinavia and Eastern Europe, Poland, Hungary, Moravia, Bohemia, since they had more contact with Orthodox in the East? We covered some of this in part 2, but I don't really know what Bohemia was doing. I know that in Poland and in Moravia, I know that there were cases where
Poland was divided. Poland had bishops that supported Clement, but Poland also had bishops that were rabid Hildebrandians, by the way, that were in Germany. They weren't the majority, but they were violent enough and they had enough money through Hildebrand that they could raise up the anti-King Rudolf, who created this massive civil war in Germany in order to overthrow the German emperors. And it was just war after war. There were groups of Slavonic monks, actually, that were living at Tiniac. which is an abbey about 20 miles from Krakow now, modern Krakow, in which they celebrated like a Slavonic Western Rite. Now after there was this. I'm trying to remember here, but there was a victory somehow in Poland for the Hildebrandians, and basically they drove out all the what were called Wibertine bishops. That's the claim of the third bishops, and then they got a hold of
the Roman bishops.
Yeah, and then they got a hold of the Slavonic abbot who was doing the Slavonic Western Rite, and I think either they tortured him or put him in prison, and they either expelled or killed a lot of the monks. Because, in fact, this is something that's very touchy among some Polish historians, especially who were Roman Catholic, was about the fact that there is seeming these more and more fragmentary evidence about the Western Roman Rite that was being done in Poland initially was Slavonic. Because that would make sense. There's already Slavonic Western Rite books that goes back to at least the late 800s.
Yeah.
All right? And if it worked in Bohemia, I mean, they had Eastern Rite. I'm not denying that happened. That was successful. But if you're having cases of German bishops come in allowing at least Slavonic Western Rite as an option, I mean, they might think, well, look, this is a better option if it's going to convert people than simply making everybody do everything in Latin. But, that's an interesting question in itself. There was some hostility already in 1053 between the Russians and the Poles, though, because there were certain Polish clergy that were actually claiming that they were having to baptize Russians. All right? And the Russians retaliated by saying, look, well, we're going to baptize you if you come over to us. So that's kind of in 1053 or 1054. That was something that was already beginning to happen at that point. Although noted, Hildebrand was still in charge, technically, behind Leo IX at the time.
Yeah. Now, there's more questions popping up.
Okay. Just one other point that before people misunderstand me, you have to also understand that aspects of the Chronicle of Nestor, or kind of the old Russian primary chronicle, there are additions of that text that do not have the full accounts provided in much later medieval and early Renaissance texts. All right. For example, there's one text that says that the Saint Vladimir chose the Greeks because, and there was a Greek philosopher there who claimed that the Poles are using oplatiki, or unleavened bread. But that's actually a much later edition where they merged two texts together that were, read. It's like, for example, the letter between John of Kiev and Clement III. There's actually discussion about that. That letter is half correct and half not. That is, parts of it are in fact fused together with another letter that another Metropolitan John 100 years later wrote to the anti-Pope Clement III, who would be the Roman Catholic, to say the rule of Clement III. All right, but my point is that you have to be careful when dealing with some of the early Russian primary chronicle sources, because you have to determine, is this actually what happened, or is this what a 15th century amalgamation happened? All right, it's just like you have a Byzantine text from the 1400 called the Obscula, in Latin it's called Obscula contra Francorum, and it has a lot of misinformation. I don't believe the author is a heretic, but he just simply did not understand what actually was happening in the 9th and 10th century. Because at one point he calls Pope Nicholas I, a great holy pope, when Nicholas I generally had extremely negative reputation, obviously for obvious reasons, because he attacked St. Photius. All right, yeah. So you have to understand that Orthodox people, we're right about the facts. I mean, or the conclusions. The filioque is a heresy. Unleavened bread's a heresy. Papism is a heresy. That doesn't mean we always get the exact methodology in which these things transpire correct. Okay? So, because I've seen people get very discouraged when they read some medieval Byzantine or Russian source, and they say, well, I know this is not actually factual based upon historical records from, Italy in 750 or something like that. I mean, if you're dealing with a Russian chronicler writing in Moscow in 1450, they're 700 years removed from the fact they may just simply be relaying, for lack of a better word, legend. They're not intentionally lying about something. But this happens throughout church history. All right, you can have people just get the basics right, but other stuff can be wrong. I just wanted to add that in there.
No problem. Okay, so we're gonna move on. I'm gonna go through them quick as I can. A show on the decline of Mount Athos from being old calendars also to bowing down to the EP could be interesting. I don't know how much that has to do with apologetics, and it's also Greek stuff, but in any case, maybe.
I only brought Mount Athos up as an example of a large
something of huge size. Yeah.
At one point, Mount Athos had 100,000 monks on it. So,
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
Now, Anthony also asks, do the Franks play a part in the schism?
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
Yes and no. I don't think they play the part. I think they don't. They don't play the part that Romanides believes they play the part. But because, frankly, remember, Saint Photius actually wrote letters to the Emperor Lothar, or was it one of the three emperors that were successors of Louis the Pious, in which he was saying, look, if can you please go and get rid of Nicholas because he's causing a lot of problems. And actually, one of the emperors, German emperors or Frankish emperors, actually surrounded Rome with an army. And now it didn't work. Nicholas never left the city, but they wouldn't necessarily repudiate the concept of doing that. The other point is that Frankish power basically began to disintegrate with the death of Charlemagne. Louis the Pious succeeds Charlemagne, and it's very strange because, remember, Frankish law, there were really many problems with it. One, it didn't recognize primogeniture, which is the Roman concept, which is actually probably a better concept. Frankish law, you didn't have a say in your will. Everything went to all the sons equally. So if Charlemagne's sons had all survived, legitimate sons, then they all would divide the empire up. So Louis becomes emperor. Louis can't really hold everything together. The whole Frankish empire, arranged under Charlemagne, was more a result of, if you know what I mean, a personal union, his personal military abilities, charisma, etc. Once he dies, everything begins to disintegrate. And by the time you get to the 890s, you're beginning to see the rise of the Saxons, who don't appreciate being called Franks, by the way.
Yeah, and
that actually would agitate them when they would go to Constantinople, because they're like, we were invaded by the Franks. We don't consider ourselves Franks.
And then, I think the biggest problem with that is that if we look at that, if we are looking at the
problem, though, is that in Constantinople, they were using the word Frank to describe every single Westerner. And,
right.
And the result is that an Irishman, you could have an Irish peasant, and they did go on pilgrimage to Jerusalem or Constantinople for relics. He could show up in Constantinople in 1000 AD, and they would give him communion in the church, but they'd still think, oh, he's a Frank.
But
he might get upset and say, I'm not Frank, but they'd still call him a Frank because that's just what they were, the general terms.
And that's my point, is that by the time of Benzo's writing this letter to the emperor, the concept of Roman supranationality already existed.
Now remember, Benzo already defines there's a difference between Frank and Greek and German. Yeah. Remember, he talks about the Greeks have the empire in Italy at this one point, then the Franks have the empire, then the Germans have the empire. All right?
But the concept of the empire is still retained, and so it's much less viciously delineated as it is in Romanides, and more importantly, in Romanides he's often inaccurate. But ultimately,
most of Romanides' theories are based almost solely upon someone like Edmund Salisbury Folkes from the 1870s, yep. Whose book on the primitive consecration of the Eucharist has an interesting translations, but it's entirely facetious. The book at one point tries to claim that Emilarius of Metz composed the Roman canon of the Mass, which is absolutely ridiculous because they actually, and people pointed out to Salisbury Folkes, look, there are editions of the Roman canon from like 680, 690 called the Bobbio Missal.
Yeah.
And he just ignored it because he was like a Roman Catholic who converted to Anglicanism, and he wanted to, it was very, they were, anyway, a lot of things Romanides says has kind of been a combination of, forgive me for that word, but ignorant Greek legends that people just make up. They don't really have any idea of the history, combined with bad Western scholarship for the 19th century, and then exaggerating it by a factor of 10. So I wouldn't. So again,
I'd like to get to the next question. So.
Again, if the Byzantines say the Franks caused the schism, the problem is this. They're going to be saying Franks means all Westerners. That's just such a general term. I'd actually have to be reading and talking to them at the time, which I can't do, to actually understand, well, which Franks? Do you delineate between Lombards and Germans and, Bavarians and Saxons?
Yeah, the Lombards had a huge role, but
first of all, the Lombards completely objected to all of Hildebrandianism. They were only submitted to it forcibly by the terror the Palatines raged, anyway, not to get
What about the Normans? The point is, it's a hard question to answer because Frank is so generalizing. Atomic Lead asks, another question, if I may, is there the possibility that the Hildebrandian movement was an overcompensation for the embarrassment of the pornocracy? I'd like to answer that because I did mention that in the first episode we did on this, the first episode of our show. I don't believe that it was a large movement based upon that. I personally believe that Hildebrand was motivated by it. He constantly talks about things like Justitia for Rome before, of course, he plans his own domination of Rome. But the point is, he definitely, the pornocracy affected him, but he had some sort of idea that he was going to create some sort of purity. And in that sense, I guess you could say he's really the classic villain who wants to be a hero, but ends up becoming the villain that he didn't want to be.
Of course, in reality, most villains, unless they're really evil people, and that's, most villains don't consciously believe they're villains.
Right.
So.
Now, now, does there exist a timeline of all true Orthodox fragments and how they relate to each other? Think about taking my family under the GOCK, but I want to make the right decision. I don't feel comfortable answering that question. I mean, I can recommend our synod. I can't really recommend other synods. But if they're true Orthodox, I'm not going to be. I don't have much to say. And that's this is comment going to GOCK. I would say avoid Gregory of Denver and Hockna, because Hockna are name worshippers and Gregory's a cult leader. But outside of that, I think most of the true Orthodox people are just normal people. This is more opinion about Father Seraphim Rose, the Orthodox word issues. Okay, I don't know what's close to. Okay, well, if it's 3 hours away, it's a blood vig, but you can also do services at home, and you can, if you're working with your bishop, you can do a lot more. And so there's a few there's options, and if anyone ever needs our help, we'll always be glad to help. But other than that, I think we've gone now almost 2 hours. Did you have any other? I think we basically. I think this kind of seals the nail on the coffin, especially with the handy chart, because I think really it's hard to say. It's hard to say that you can kind of take the historical details and kind of muddle them up so that they don't sound like, oh, there's a massive schism going on in Rome for 40 years, and there's a power struggle between popes being elected legitimately and false Sarabites basically taking over and trying to demonstrate their power.
I think you're underestimating it. 40 years it's about almost an 80-year struggle that's happening.
Yeah, 80 years of
80 years of chaos and struggle.
Well, that's part of the reason why I wanted to do it with a handy chart, because I think you can see here's the decline and death of the Roman papacy. Here's how the Hildebrandians come, the Synod of Brixen, and basically you can hopefully see with the handy chart and with the text that we've provided in the chat, so on and so forth, you can review them yourself, that when they call it the investiture controversy, what they really meant was a civil and almost regional war throughout the West that took decades for Hildebrand to kind of create.
Well, remember, even after Clement III dies, then you have what? Theodore, who was the successor. I can't remember Theodore. There were actually two other successors. However, they captured them, they imprisoned them in monasteries, supposedly, and they died. It really wasn't until around 1115 that the imperial was 1115 that the Diet of Concordant of Worms or something like that was passed.
Yeah, the Concordant of Worms. Yeah.
Yeah, in which at that point the Hildebrandians had caused so much violence and civil war and mass struggle and death and terror that the German government, unfortunately, the German emperor simply just said, "Well, let's just make an agreement with them, and maybe it'll work out." And as a result, what happened? A large portion of people just simply accepted it. I don't know if they. That's another question about the aftermath of the schism.
Now, this is an interesting question. Although I'm not a fan of alt history, but if Hildebrand didn't lead the way, were there others who would have taken his place in causing the schism?
If there were not, now by Hildebrand, do you mean Humbert? Maybe. I mean, if you mean Hildebrandianism.
But Humbert was too dumb. I mean, Hildebrand, I hate to say it, from a strategic standpoint, Hildebrand's a genius. He's an evil genius, but he's a genius. Humbert wouldn't have come up with the funding issues. He wouldn't have had backup plans, and said Humbert was a buffoon who did what he was told. I don't see.
He also tended to cause trouble wherever he went.
And what was that on orders, or was that due to incompetence?
Well, I mean,
either way, yeah.
He supposedly did right. I mean, I wouldn't say he was an idiot, but he wasn't of the same caliber of a Hildebrand. No, I mean,
yeah, he was not that level.
The question is this: if it had simply remained, let's say, Adamus II, like a figure like Adamus II, having continued to be elected, what would have happened? Well, there would have been no mission by Humbert. Because Humbert was a firebrand, Hildebrand was a firebrand. They were trying to engineer these problems to begin with. So even if Patriarch Michael is like, look, I got these complaints, you have a figure like Adamus II in 1054 sends a regular old Roman ambassador from Rome there. And, remember, when Humbert went to Constantinople, the emperor, the patriarch, everybody tried were as nice to him as they could possibly be. And we're trying to hold civil conversations with him, like, let's discuss this, let's look at all the issues. And Humbert was like, I'm not having any of it. And he wanted to cause as much trouble as possible. So if you're looking at, like Adamus III or IV or whatever, sending, just a regular old, German or Latin ambassador, and it would, at the absolute worst, you're talking about a situation that just, at the absolute worst, muddles on for 50, 60, 80, 100 more years. But I don't think it would come to a schism. And I know that sounds radical, but I think it's because you had to have a violent, provocative, ultramontane force that wanted to push the issues to such extremity that they could have no remedy.
Well, that's kind of why because if you push it that far, because remember, even there was at one point in which Urban II wrote a letter. I mean, he's anti-pope from our perspective, obviously. The Hildebrandian wrote a letter to Constantinople saying, "Well, why are we in schism? We should discuss things." And the Patriarch of Constantinople and the Synod was like, "Well, we're not sure why." Apparently, I guess they had forgotten about what happened 30 years earlier, but we'll talk about it. Now, they never did, but I mean, if they're willing to even say, well, maybe we'll have a discussion, because remember, it's only been 30 years since the events of 1054 and the 1090s. So it's not like it's some kind of ecumenical movement or something like that, all right? It's trying to repair what was, at that point, becoming a schism and becoming a heresy. But if you're having figures that aren't that hostile, they're not making dictatus Papae claims, and I see that there could have been something, yes, would not have happened. I think that I agree that the schism would not have happened, because I don't think that people like Urban II would have succeeded to begin with.
No.
But more importantly, and this is where that question that Atomic Bleed asking about the pornocracy, Hildebrand, unlike everyone around him in his circle, seemed very mentally focused in what he wanted. I hate to say this, it sounds horrible. But if you want to take a leadership course in despotism, Hildebrand was really, really probably probably a great person to look at. And I don't mean a great person as in a great person. I mean that he knew he knew what he wanted. He knew what he wanted to create, and he figured out the means to get it.
And you have to say, how could the schism happen without Humbert provoking everything? Because remember, even when Patriarch Michael issued the anathema, he said he anathematized Humbert and those who anathematized him, Patriarch Michael. He wasn't technically anathematizing anybody else. Now, the rest of the rest, after they lost to the Hildebrandians, got dragged into the schism, into the heresy, obviously.
Well, immediately, one thing to keep in mind is that
Patriarch Michael's still not attacking everybody. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I was simply going to say that if you contrast Urban II and his responses to Constantinople with Hildebrand himself, Hildebrand takes Anselm of Canterbury and immediately sends him out in disputations with Greek delegations so that he can demonstrate that,
exactly.
and try to demonstrate the superiority of the new Roman system.
Because remember, Anselm of Canterbury was the chief apologist, dogmatic apologist for the Filioque. Because even though the Filioque was spreading in the West, it was being accepted where it was because of just inertia of that. If you know what I mean. If you're having somebody come about saying that, look, there's a mistake here that shouldn't have got added, and they're not coming about with dogmatic points, trying to defend it, in an obstinate way, you can deal with people who are making mistakes and are not obstinately opposing the church, if you know what I mean.
Right.
All right.
Exactly.
If they're willing to say, look, we'll have a council. Here are the oldest manuscripts of the creed. Because remember, this is the time where they're also making a lot of forgeries, claiming the creed always had the filioque in it. All right. That was also a big part of, especially Thomism, or the early Thomists, early scholastics, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Now, okay, last question. Okay, he says, last question for me after the Concordant of Worms. Was there any more immediate resistance anywhere in the West? I would say that it was basically at that point, you like with the Gallicans and stuff like that, but it was really localized except for that particular one.
Well, the Gallicans were fighting from within movement, and that's why it never succeeded, frankly.
Yeah.
They made peace with the organization. Hildebrandians did not intentionally try to violently persecute them because they had already won. If they could control the papacy, they figured they could filter everything down over centuries. And because the Gallicans, who were the older Western party, simply accepted this, because the emperor won peace, they became fighting from within. And the problem with fighting from within is that if you don't actually control the majority of the hierarchy and the centers of power, you don't really succeed in the long run. Secondly, you did have, in fact, at least in England and France, they never were really able to enforce the forbidding of married men being ordained and having children, with their wives after they were ordained clergy. That's something that gradually came out in the 12th and 13th centuries. There were even places in France that up into the 1240s, as according to Alexander de Hales in the 13th century, that poor clergy did still not refuse for whatever reason to recite the filioque in the creed. He doesn't say who they were. He just says they were still priests known in areas in the countryside who would never do that. And the problem, of course, is that this would be a whole other discussion about what remnants were left, and would they simply be called heretics, schismatics, just swept under the rug? Because remember, once you start getting to Innocent III in the 1200s, in his perversion of Roman law, they're going to the point where they're now establishing the fact that heretics and schismatics are simply going to be executed, right? So while there may be truth that the Inquisition was exaggerated, they were still executing people.
Yeah.
Now, if you were canted, they wouldn't execute you. All right. But you burn. All you need to do is burn a few people at the stake, and you can terrify thousands of people into doing whatever you wanted to do. So,
Michael asks, I think, the last question that we have, which is, when did the Western spirituality come into play? Was it Francis of Assisi or before him? I think this can clearly establish that it was before him.
Yes.
Because
I think you're starting to see things like that. You can still find figures in the 11th century who, like, there were various monks and hermits around Ravenna who weren't necessarily objectionable, obviously. But I think what happened. I think what you're going to see is an establishment of a new spirituality with Anselm, but also it comes really in the 12th and 13th centuries.
Yeah,
because remember, when schisms and heresies happen, that doesn't automatically, and they take over after long struggle. It doesn't automatically mean all the regular people in all the other places are, if you know what I mean. It doesn't mean automatically. It's, for example, like the Uniates, the Byzantine Uniates in Ukraine, right? They get forced and tricked into apostasy, schism and heresy. But after 100, 150, 200 years, they're beginning to use like the rosary and that kind of stuff. They weren't doing that initially, but that stuff starts to come in over time. That's another question we have to go into. That's like an aftermath, kind of a post-mortem discussion, actually. And I'm not too prepared to get to that right now.
I would say that by the time I hate to say this, by the time the new religion was formed, it came with its own spirituality, which had not fully developed, but it would. So Francis of Assisi is a product of that. He is not the inventor of that. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, thank you everyone for listening. Thanks for your questions, your comments. We appreciate all of them. And did you have anything left to say, Vladika?
No, I'm fine.
All right. In that case, thank you everyone for listening. Have a great night. And
Christ is risen.
Truly is risen. Have a good night, all.